Anyway, I'm going to just begin right at Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, but I'm going to back up a little bit in a little bit. But it says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." Now, I want us to take that verse, first of all. He says, "Therefore, when you see," I want us to understand this is something that you as a reader can see and can understand. If you studied the book of Daniel, there's 3 times that it talks about the abomination of desolation in the book of Daniel, in chapter 9 and in chapter 11 and chapter 12. And I'm not going to look at all those right at this time. I'm just wanting us to understand that Jesus meant for us to see something. An event that took place today, I was looking on Facebook. A pastor friend of mine that used to serve on our district now serves in California, but he wrote, "The mark of the beast is not an event or a thing that's going to happen at some point in the future. The mark of the beast is something that is now. It is accepting the ways of the world as being your standards and all of that." And anyway, was saying that the mark of the beast was never actually going to be something to be concerned about as far as an event in the future. And that hurt my heart. I didn't write him back, and I don't know that I will, but it concerns me. But another thing that concerned me about it was another pastor's wife chimed in and said, "I'm so glad you've said that, because it's concerned me, especially with all these things that are going on. I just want things to be the way they were before this all started. I want us just all to live in peace and everything going along as it was going. And then someday Jesus will just come and take us all away. But until then, I want to believe that there's not going to be a mark of the beast and all of that." And somebody else, there was maybe 40 or 50 comments. And another person commented and said, "They say you can't teach an old dog new trick, but I guess I'm having to shake off a few fleas because I'm learning something new that I didn't know before." But nobody argued with the fact that when he said that the mark of the beast wasn't a real thing that was going to happen. I think those were his exact words. That bothered me. Another thing that bothered me, 2 other things I guess I could say that bothered me. One was an email that I got from a group that they give a lot of different commentaries on prophecy, and then a lot of links to different articles that are written by different people and various things about that have to do with prophecy. But one of the things that they said was, "Goodbye, great time of great sorrows. Hello, great tribulation." Well, here's the thing. For one thing, the time of great sorrows. Now, there has been a time of sorrows, and we are in a time of sorrows. Yes, that's true. But until you see the confirmation of the covenant spoken of by Daniel the prophet in Daniel 9:27, then we're not in that time that Jesus referred to as the, I've got to be careful how I say this, but we're not in that last period of time of the great sorrows. In other words, a woman may go into, begin to have birth pains sometime prior to the time that the child's going to be delivered. That's a reality. And in fact, she can have, I think it's called Braxton Hicks or something like that, where she can have false labor pains, but there comes a time when the birth pains become timed, in other words, rhythmic. They come, they go, and they become more and more severe until they come to the point of bringing about the birth of the child. And so we've not yet gotten to the point, even though this may be part of the birth pains, we haven't reached that point of saying we're at the end of the great birth pains. We are not to that point yet. Now, if you see the confirmation of the covenant, then you're on the countdown. And so in the same way that an obstetrician may look to a woman and say, "You're on the last countdown," and could even possibly give an estimate as to time as to when the child might be born, which might or might not be right, in the same way, when you see certain events happen, you know that we began that last final countdown. Is this virus part of the birth pains? Very well could be. Is it part of the final birth pains? Is this the worst that it's going to get? Absolutely not. So when we get into the fourth kingdom, you could look in the fourth kingdom, either looking in Daniel chapter 7, the first few verses, or Revelation chapter 6, the first few verses, the riders of the horsemen of the apocalypse, and either one of those. The fourth one will, like in Revelation chapter 6, when you read about the breaking of the fourth seal, you see that one will kill a fourth of humanity, and one of the ways that it does that is by pestilence. And a plague possibly could be considered a pestilence. I'm not sure about that, but it may be that. But if so, that would be as close as you could come. But the sword, the pestilence, the wild beast of the earth, and famine, those things will be killing humanity prior to the fourth rider, the rider on the pale green horse, or death. So prior to that, now that rider comes forth following the abomination of desolation, which begins the last 1,260 days, the last 3.5 years. So there's 3.5 years prior to that, from the confirmation of the covenant until the abomination of desolation is 1,260 days. And then the Antichrist is given 1,260 days. And the reason for that is because Satan knows, the dragon knows, that he has a short while. So he gives the Antichrist a very short period of time, 1,260 days. That's the second half of the 7 years. So 1,260 days comes together to make the full 7 years. And then there's an event that happens at that point. There's an event that happens at 1,290 days. And there's one that happens at 1,335 days, as we'll see here in a little bit. We may get that far. Now, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. The other thing, a third thing that I read this week, and I thought it would be interesting because it was from the same website, where they were talking about the book of Daniel. And they were explaining the book of Daniel, but they went back to a way that I've heard many, many years ago when I was at school, where they took the book of Daniel, and the main thing that they were trying to say was, or that people have tried to say about the book of Daniel, is that Daniel didn't write anything predictive, that Daniel was written very far after the events had all taken place, and some writer of history wrote back into the voice of a person called the prophet Daniel, wrote in apocalyptic or apocryphal or apocalyptic literature type language this predictive things about kingdoms that had already come and gone. I want you to know that yes, you could probably twist some of the teachings of Daniel into some of those. Now, he does talk about some of those in some of the chapters. But when you get into chapters 9 through 12, and that's what this writer was saying, those chapters should be just divided up and put between chapters 2 and 3 and between chapters 5 and 6 and this place and that place, and divide those chapters up, those last chapters, and put them in other places. I want you to know that Jesus saw Daniel as a what? Prophet. That which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet. This is Jesus saying that. So Jesus expected that we should be able to see. Notice, therefore, when you see, what does that mean? It's visible. It's something that can be seen. If you're watching, if you studied the book of Daniel, especially if you've studied Daniel, and I'll say, I would say study the whole thing, but read especially chapters 7 through 12. And you only have to 12 chapters if you're a Protestant. Catholics have 13 and 14. And you'll see about, well, I won't get into what 13 and 14 gets into, but But read those chapters and you will see the 3 times that he talks about the abomination of desolation. Maybe not in exactly the right words, but he uses the words abomination and desolation in Daniel 9:27, and then in chapter 11 and verse 33, 34, 35, and then in chapter 12 you'll see it as well, and we'll look at that in a little bit. So when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. There's a reason for that. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now you'll remember last week I showed you pictures of Petra, where, at least what I was taught, that's where they believe the Jews will flee. They'll flee through a chasm created, or a valley created by an earthquake, and they will be able to flee to the very far side of the Jordan Valley rift, to the far side of the Dead Sea, down by the Salt Sea, and up on the eastern bank of that, and will be separated off actually from Judea and from Israel by the water in between, possibly water that's been poured out from heaven, which takes place in the middle of the 7 years. So it talks about it. So I remember from Revelation chapter 12, verse 6, I read to you, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God there, so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. How long? 1,260 days. That is 3.5 years of 12 months each year, and the months being 30 days long. So that's just easy math. Now, so Jesus, though, said, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. I think I've told you before, I can't say for certain that means if you're in the city, flee. However, we're going to look at the verses that follow, verses 17 and following, the rest of the verses. There's something that's very important. When the order comes to shelter in place, or the lockdown order comes, and especially if it is enforced by either National Guard, by law enforcement, by military, whatever it is, it's going to be impossible to move. And people who try to move out of the cities at that point will be find themselves arrested and locked down. So you've had an illustration of what it means. Yes, that's on. So you've seen what it means to see a lockdown. And so you know what can happen. So you're watching for that. And so there's something to watch for. Now, when do you begin the countdown of the 1,260 days? When the confirmation of the covenant occurs. You know that Jerusalem was recognized by the United States as the eternal capital of the Jewish state of Israel. Some people believe that was the confirmation of the covenant. If so, 1,260 days later should be the abomination of desolation. Myself, I don't believe that was it, because it missed some elements of chapter 9 and verse 27, and that is it would be with the many for 1 week, or one group of 7. And so I didn't see those 2 elements in it. I'm not saying I know for certain that it's not. I'm just saying to me it doesn't fit. But I want us to look at Matthew 24:15. One of the things I want us to do, though, let me real quickly, I'm going to go back to, for just a little bit, to Matthew 24, and I'm going to go back to verse 13, I believe is where I'll start. Let's see. No, yes, I will. Yeah, verse 13. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. That's the end of the gospel. This, our commission, the Great Commission, our commission was to carry the gospel into all the world as a witness to all the peoples of all the nations. There will come a time when that is going to be completed as far as carrying it to all the world. I know there's still people being saved, and I don't believe that it means that he's going to draw a line and say, as of this point, no one else can be saved. I don't think that's what it's saying, but I do believe there will come a time when those who've not yet been saved, who've decided not to be saved, when they will not repent, because it just says that over and over. In fact, I think it says 7 times in Revelation, and they did not repent. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. What does that mean? To the end of that church age, this age that we know now as the day of salvation, will end at twilight or at sundown of the day of salvation. What's the day that follows? It's the day of the Lord. And if you'll read about the day of the Lord, you can go back to Amos and read about the day of the Lord in Amos. And he said, why are you longing for the day of the Lord? It's going to be darkness. It's going to be a time of gloom. And he talks about the things that's going to be. Why are you longing for the day of the Lord? I've got to tell you that following the end of the day of salvation, and I'm so grateful for, I quote Billy Graham a lot, because I believe he was the watchman one of the watchmen of the fourth watch of the day of salvation. He was at the end of it, and in fact, I haven't heard it, but he, I think, preached a message on watchman of the fourth watch, meaning the fourth watch of the day of salvation. But we saw the worldwide crusades, the televised crusades, and we in the bright light saw the gospel brought forth into all the world for a witness. And we were saved during that time. And those who were saved, thank God for that. And now he's talking about those who endure to the end shall be saved. God can carry us all the way to the end. But understand this, verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now, the one that endures to the end will be saved, and he's saying, when the gospel has been preached into all the world for a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. They said, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? What will be the things that we should look for the end of the age? And he's telling them this and this and this. And then he says on there, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Verse 14, the word come ends at twilight, sundown of the day of salvation. What do you know about sundown? You know that their sundown is followed by twilight. There's a little bit of time, like right now here in New Mexico at Hobbs, it's twilight. The sun has gone down, and yet it's still daylight outside. There's still plenty of light. You would not stumble if you walked outside. But you know what I can tell you for certain? That in a little while, it's going to be dark. It's getting darker and darker and darker. And that's just the reality. And then the end will come. The day of salvation has come to a close and is coming to a close. The day of the Lord is coming about, but the day of the Lord begins with night. And if you read in Amos, you'll see he very well describes the night. There are many other places do as well, but that's one of the places I was reading today. I read, in fact, I think most, if not all, the book of Amos today, reading about, and he really is clear about the day of the Lord. Then the end will come. Now, what is the next thing after that? Verse 14, verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. So that's where we began, and that's to get the context of that. When you see, one thing I can tell you for certain, if you know what the abomination of desolation is, which you can know by reading 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 2 and following, you can know for certain what the abomination of desolation is. There's no reason for you to be not knowing when the abomination of desolation takes place. When you see a man who has been apparently resurrected from the dead, who has miraculously taken on powers and all of those things, and when he sets himself up in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God, that is the abomination that makes the temple desolate. That's the abomination. When men worship a man there rather than worship God, they've made the temple desolate. That doesn't mean God's going to abandon it for all time. It means this is an abomination that God will not abide in the temple because it has made it desolate, and action will be taking place after this. That's a reality. The abomination of desolation, it was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, and if you're a reader of Daniel the prophet, you'll understand that. I'm not saying that's the only place you should read. Yes, you should read about other places. Yes, you should read, like, you won't make the mistake that some of my friends have made. But if you'll read the 13th chapter of Revelation, you will not make a mistake about the mark of the beast. If you read the 12th and 13th chapter, you will not make a mistake about the abomination of desolation, as well as the mark of the beast, which the mark of the beast follows the abomination of desolation. If you read the book of Daniel, chapters 9 and 11 and 12, you'll not make a mistake about this. Let the reader understand. So when you see the abomination of desolation, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And so we talked about fleeing, or that she fled, the woman fled. I understand that here is talking very specifically about those that are in the West Bank. Judea is what we now call the occupied territories, or the West Bank. I don't call them the occupied territories. I don't believe they're occupied territories, but I do believe they're the West Bank, and that they will soon be annexed by Israel and will be part of Israel. But when you see this happen, those that are in that area are to flee not to Jerusalem or not even to Israel, but flee to the mountains. And it's very obviously not the mountains to the north of Israel, because at that point there's going to be great conflict on that mountain. If you read the rest of Daniel chapter 11, the verses leading up to verse 33 and 34 and 35, if you read those verses, you'll see very clearly there's a war going on at that time, and that's not the place to flee. God will show her where to flee, and many of them, in fact 2/3 of them, will be destroyed, but a third will come safely through. And so she'll be nourished, as we read last week, for 1,260 days. Now back to Matthew chapter 24, verse 17. Let him who's on the housetop now go down to get his house. Now what that's talking about is the housetop would be the place where a person maybe would take their nap at noon or something of that sort. And it's saying don't even run through the house to get your go bag before you get out of Dodge. Just go. If you're not in town, don't go back into town. Don't worry about getting your stuff. If you don't already have your stuff out of town, don't go back to get it. Because if you're caught, I want to make absolutely clear, stay true. Because we're going to get to the fifth breaking of the fifth seal, and we may get there tonight. I don't know whether we will or not, but at that point, most Christians, you need to just understand this. If you're a Christian, you live into this time, you're probably not going to live through this. You are probably going to be granted the privilege of being a martyr for Jesus Christ. And you just need to take that into consideration and take it as a privilege. Escape and evade if you can. Did Jesus say flee? Yes, he said flee. And so I'm saying the same thing. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Yes, the woman fled. You should flee. And there you will be taken care of. God will take care of you if you flee. God will help you in your flight. Pray during that period of time. And there will be special considerations. Some of you have children at home. Some of you are taking care of babies that you don't know how you would take care of them if this time came. You don't know how you'd take care of yourself. Leave that to God. Pray. And yes, it's a very sad time for those who are with child or that are taking care of children in those times. Yes, but can God take care of you in that time? Absolutely. By the way, who's taken care of you so far? Have you taken care of yourself by your wits or by your whatever? Or has God taken care of you? And the reality is, if you'll be truthful with yourself, you'll realize God is taking care of you, and God knows how to take care of you. I can look back and how many times I made decisions that I was in question about whether it was even a good decision. May not have seemed wise at the time. And now I look back over the years, I say, God, help me through those decisions, and I made the right decision. Had I made the opposite decision, it would have been disastrous. But God helped me with those decisions, and God will help you. Pray during that time. So that's what he says. So let him that's on the housetop not go down to get the things that are in the house. Let him that's in the field not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse babes in those days. But pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation. This is the great tribulation. I want you to know the great tribulation has not occurred and not beginning, not today, it's not beginning tomorrow, it's beginning after the abomination of desolation. And you can read the 11th chapter of Daniel and you can see the wars that are taking place. And a lot of those wars you can say, well, those are wars that took place in ancient history. Yes, they may very well have been wars that took place in ancient history, some of them. But as you get closer to that 30th verse and 33rd verse, you will realize that that's talking about a war that's taking place in the last of days. Woe to those when that time comes. By the way, when you see this war that's coming, realize it and be ready. Get your go bag ready. Make up something and put it in the car or whatever you're going to do. Have a place or a plan or whatever God gives you. Let God guide you. I can't tell you what to do because I don't even know what I'm going to do for certain at that time. I've got thoughts, I've got ideas and preparation, all of that. But the reality is God is the one that's got to guide you at that time. And pray about it. Pray now that your flight will not be in the winter on the Sabbath. By the way, do you think he's just talking to a few of the Jewish people at that time? Those that are the Jewish people that are in the West Bank? I think it might be talking to a lot more than that. And it could be talking to Christians of the time that it takes place. When you see, by the way, those that were the disciples who saw this event, to whom Jesus was speaking, when he said, when you see, those were disciples that were looking forward to a time when they were going to be dead for 2,000 years before this time came. So who is he talking to? He's talking to you. He's talking to me. And he's saying, when you see the abomination of desolation. You know what? I'm realizing that my voice has sounded like I'm preaching, and I don't intend to do that. I'm teaching. So when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of through Daniel the prophet, be ready to flee. This is not optional. This is something that is going to be necessary. However, if you decide to stay in your house, or you decide to hunker down, you decide that you're going to ride it out, and that you cannot run, that you can't do that, then understand that what you're doing is saying that within a matter of less than about 1,000 days, you're not going to keep it. Because what does it say? Let me just real quickly go to that, because some of you have not been with us through all of this study. So I'm going to very quickly go to Daniel chapter 11. Let's see. I say very quickly, Daniel chapter 11, and we'll go down to about verse 33. Let's go down to verse... I hope you can read that fast. I'm going to begin with verse 30. For ships of Kittim, meaning Cyprus, will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened, meaning the Antichrist, and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Verse 31, Daniel 11:31. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. They will set up the abomination of desolation. This is what Jesus was speaking about. Verse 32, by smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Now, there's a time when you've got to display strength and take action. You've got to do what you're going to do. So you've got to decide what you're going to do display strength, take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by, notice this, sword, flame, captivity, and plunder for many days. Say you decide you're going to stay in your home. Fine, you stay in your home. But understand this, your home is going to be taken away from you. You may say, I've got enough food. I've got enough water. I've got a home that's paid for. I've got a place that I can stay. I believe the first thing that's going to happen is that the house will be marked, because if you do not have the mark of the beast, your house will be marked. And the places where ISIS goes in, which I believe ISIS is representative of the group that will be in charge at that time. So it will be the Sunni Muslims under Sharia law. And what they do is they mark in on your house, and that N stands for Nazarite or Nazarene. And so that's what they call the people who are followers of the Nazarene. And so they mark an N on there, and they may let you stay there for a period of time, and then you will be required to pay extortion during that period of time, or you could call it taxation if you'd rather. And so, but by plunder, through the taxation, through the extortion, they will take everything that you have. And then finally, they will order you to leave your house. They will let you maybe get a suitcase and a few things for each of the ones going with you, and you will leave the house, just the way they did in Iraq and they did in Syria. So you've seen how that happens. And then they have you leave. And as you leave, there comes a point when you're away from the house and out of town, they take away your suitcases. And so the gold that you've carried or the money you've carried or anything else you've got with you, you lose that. And they just gradually take it down till you have nothing, absolutely nothing left. So by plunder, first of all, then by captivity, and I know this is backwards from the way it says in verse 33, but if you think about it, if they did it by sword first, the others wouldn't make any difference. So by plunder, they take away your house. They take everything that you have. By captivity, they take you to a place where you'll be held. By flame and by sword, they try to cause you to become a hypocrite, which is a person who accepts Sharia law and Islam under duress, as considered both by Islam as well as by Christianity as a hypocrite. And so they want to cause you to become a hypocrite at that point. So they threaten you with sword and flame. Nevertheless, you're still going to die by flame or by sword if you're taken away. Be faithful unto death, Jesus said, and I will give you the crown of life. They overcame him by the word of their testimony, by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even to the death. Be true to God. Be true to Christ, no matter what. If you decide to stay in your home and say, you know what, I can't make it to the mountains, or I can't make it to the river, I can't make it to a place of refuge outside of the city, I've got to depend on the city for my food, and the city for my shelter, and the city for this, then you're going to die by plunder first, captivity, flame, and sword. And that's the reality if you do that. If you don't take the mark of the beast, if you take the mark of the beast, a grievous sore is going to break out in your body. A malignancy will break out in your body that will finally be eating your body alive even while you're still alive. If you take the mark of the beast, if you don't take the mark of the beast, you will die by these means. But keep the faith. Keep the faith. Don't take the mark of the beast. That's as far as I need to go with that. But I just wanted to point that out. So it said, pray, but pray that your flight may not be in the winter of the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. Now, by great tribulation, we're talking about tribulation that's greater in extent. That is, it's going to cover all of Christianity. Judaism will by then, and if you did study Zechariah 12, 13, and 14, you know that the Jews, those that are left alive after the war, there will be a third of the Jews left. It'll be like the olives at the end of a branch, or a few left. A third of the Jews will be left, and those Jews will be gathered together, and they will have accepted Christ. The Spirit of grace and supplication will be poured out upon them, and they will receive Christ, and the prodigal son will have come home after having wasted his inheritance all these years. God will accept him back. And I've talked to you, and maybe I've talked to you and told you, don't be jealous of him. When God gives him an offering to make, and he begins to kill the red heifer and then begins to kill the sacrifices, don't be jealous that God never gave you a sacrifice. Christ is your sacrifice. You have everything that God has belongs to you. He's given you salvation. He's given you heaven. You have everything. Don't be jealous, but realize and welcome back the prodigal son when he comes home. Don't be like the older brother who was jealous and refused, but instead welcome them. But at that time, there is going to be trouble that's different, and tribulation, the word tribulation that's used here, means pressure. You may know that when the witches and the Salem witch trials, the way that they got them to confess, they would take a door off the house, and they were big wooden slabs built out of plank, probably maybe a couple of inches thick at least, rough sawn plank, and they were put together as doors, and they would take one of those doors off the hinges and lay it on the witch, the woman that they were accusing of being a witch. This was one of the ways they were tried, and they would then, that would be enough that if it was laid on them long enough, of course, they couldn't continue to breathe. It would push that breath out of them. But if they continued and they did not confess to being a witch, they would continue to pile rocks on it until they quit breathing. That is this picture here, for then there will be great tribulation. The idea is pressure that's greater than any pressure has ever been upon Christianity. Both the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians, the tribulation, the pressure is going to be great. And Christians will be dying, and if we get into the fifth seal, or when we get into the fifth seal, we will, I won't say when, but the Lord willing, we'll get into it. But when we do, you'll see that there is going to be a great amount. And in most Christians, there are going to be Christians, yes, left alive. And yet, if it were not for the fact that Jesus comes when he does, there would not be anyone left alive. No, there would be no flesh left alive. He will say that in just a little bit. In fact, the next verse, he actually says that, first, there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. And you know how great tribulation has been in days gone by. You've read about it. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days shall be cut short. So Jesus is going to come in time to save, for the elect's sake, to save some life. Some Christians. And does it mean a lot of them will be saved? Those who have been granted, I don't know, I almost want to call it a gift, but have been granted martyrdom as if that's God's plan for them, then they will be celebrated in heaven by the angels, by the elders, by all of heaven will celebrate those who give their lives during this time. Actually, all that give their lives all the way through. But if the days had not been cut short, if it had lasted for any longer, there would have been no life saved. Satan is trying to destroy humanity at this point. That's his whole purpose. He's finally going to destroy all of life. That's his intent, and he will be trying to do that. Not only destroy Christians, he will hate Christians, absolutely will hate Christians, and he will hate the Jews. But guess who he hates more? His own people, those who serve him, those who take the mark of the beast. They will be the ones that will receive the worst of Satan's work, the stings of these scorpions. I saw these, what they're calling murder moths or murder bugs or something yesterday. They're wasps and hornets, murder hornets, they were calling them, out of China, 2 inches long and with 20 times the venom of a normal honeybee, and stingers twice as long. And that if you get stung by more than one of them, you, with much pain, may live, although it might ruin your kidneys and some other organs. But if you get stung by more than one, you will die, more than likely. But can you imagine these not the hornets, but the scorpions that are going to come up on the earth when the um, the star from heaven falls to the earth and breaks it open. And when he opens it with the key to the bottomless pit, as out of the smoke comes the scorpions upon the earth, it will be a time of torment. He will torment those who have the mark of the beast. They will be the most tormented people, but he will be murderous not only toward them, but he will be murderous toward those who refuse the mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 6, verse 9. When he broke the fifth seal, and I told you we'd try to get to this, and we'll get to that now at this point. When he broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, wilt thou refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and brethren were to be killed, even as they had been should be completed also. So that is the fifth seal. The fourth seal is the one where the abomination of the Antichrist is revealed, when he is revealed, and so that's the rider on the green horse, or the pale green horse of death that kills a fourth of humanity. But of the fourth of humanity that he kills, when he breaks this fifth seal, the souls of those who have already been slain. Why were they slain? Because of the word of God? Yes, that was the first thing. But secondly, notice this, because of the testimony which they had maintained. They kept their testimony. Remember, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, because they did not love their life even to the death. This is the ones that is talking about here. They have been slain. Many have been slain already. Many saints have gone to be with Jesus. Many are right now in the presence of Christ. And when it says under the altar, you may think of the wooden benches in front of the church. It's not what that's talking about, but it means they're under the blood. They're the ones that have been saved, and they're in what we could call Abraham's bosom, or they are present with Christ, although Christ is at the right hand of God the Father. But the souls of those who have been slain because of the word of God, they're crying out to him, slain because of the word of God, because of their testimony. They cried out, how long? They're wanting to know. And I think today they're already, and many saints are dying a martyr's death even today. And they're going out into eternity, and they're crying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Those that are still alive, they're asking that question. And I believe already that they're being prepared for the time, but very soon there will be given to each of them a white robe, and they're told that they just need to rest for a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, should be completed also. You may be in one of those groups, and very well may be part of that number. Notice the word, the number, right there. That may be your name, okay? The number of the fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, should be completed also. That may be talking about you. The number of their fellow servants, that may be you. Fellow servants, brethren to those who have died a martyr's death, who were to be killed, even as they had been, should be completed also. And only God knows. I don't know. There are a lot of things that the prophets didn't know, that the angels didn't know, Gabriel didn't know. Jesus said he didn't know the day or the hour, that only the Father knew that. There are many things. But God knows what you're going to need, and God knows what your lot is to be. God knows your strength. God knows how he's taking care of you. God knows how to deliver you. And God knows what you will need in the days. But God also knows even now whether you have been marked, whether he knows that you will be one of those. You may be, we may be, you and I may be among those who are to be killed, even as those saints who have gone before. And that number is to be completed. if we read the rest of this, and we're not going to, but not at this point. But if we were to read it, we would see see God's blessing upon those, what He says about them as we follow that. The clock is ringing here, and I don't want to start the next segment without having the amount of time to do it justice.